Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really profound paradigm shift when it comes to family psychology and how emotional expression actually evolves across generations. We're going to be mapping all this out using a truly transformative book called The Architect of the House by Creative Corner. Now, if you've ever felt, a bit of a disconnect between the kind of love you expected growing up and the love you actually received, well, this explainer is going to hand you a completely new set of blueprints to finally understand that dynamic. Right off the bat, let's look at the book's dedication. Quote, "For the man who checked the locks twice so you could sleep without knowing the world had sharp edges." This instantly pulls us into the cinematic, deeply atmospheric journey from childhood all the way to adulthood. It immediately reframes a father's silence. We so often look at silence and think, oh, that's an absence of care, right? But this challenges us to see it as a heavy, highly protective architecture. He wasn't just ignoring the world, he was aggressively managing its sharp edges so you wouldn't have to. So to really wrap our heads around this translation gap, we first have to define the text's central thesis, which is covert love. This is the love that acts rather than declares. See, there's this massive difference between the expressive love we're used to seeing in movies, the sweeping declarations, the poetic words, and this hidden, active dialect that so many men were culturally conditioned to speak. Changing the oil, cleaning out the gutters, building a bookshelf. They were taught that to provide is to protect, and to do is to love. And this right here perfectly illustrates the core tension that the author explores throughout the book. On one side, you have a child who naturally expects legible words, that clear spoken, "I love you." But on the other side, we have a father who is speaking an entirely different language, one of provision, maintenance, and physical action. So it's not that the love isn't there, not at all. It's just that the two parties are speaking entirely different dialects without a shared dictionary. Think back to those early years of fatherhood to see how this builds. Quote, "I want you to know that the midnight check was never about whether you were safe. It was about needing to stand near the fact of you." This steps directly into a father's mind as he stands in a dark hallway at 3 a.m. We realize that checking on a sleeping baby wasn't just about safety protocols or worrying about statistics. No, it was a visceral, almost overwhelming need to just witness this impossible, fragile thing that had just been handed to him. Notice the cognitive dissonance between what we saw, checking the locks and car seat ratings, versus what he felt, a private liturgy and terror of his own inadequacy. As kids, the actions we witnessed, like obsessively checking those car seat ratings or pacing the perimeter of the house, well, they appeared purely mechanical. But the reality underneath was completely different. These were actually load-bearing walls of desperate, overwhelming affection. They were literally his private liturgy to keep you safe. Now, moving into the long, ordinary, middle years of childhood, we hit this friction of a father trying to repair a tense household. Quote, "You asked me once why I fixed things instead of talking about them. I didn't have an explanation I could offer you that night." You might remember a tense family evening where, instead of actually talking about the underlying emotional issue, your dad was intensely focused on fixing a broken kitchen drawer. As the book shows us, he simply didn't have the emotional vocabulary to explain that fixing that drawer was his way of stabilizing a shaky environment. Which brings us to a really crucial point: instrumental expressivity. This is communicating emotional states through tangible action and the production of results, rather than the declaration of feelings. This behavior absolutely isn't emotional avoidance. It's a fully realized psychological framework. For these men, the attending is the feeling. When he fixes a squeaky door so you can sleep, fixing the root cause of that friction is his absolute highest form of love. It's love translated directly into iron, wood, and action. And looking at what we saw, filling the car with petrol in silence, versus what he felt, "I will come and get you. I will not let you be stranded." This brilliantly illustrates the translation matrix in action. To a teenager, a dad obsessively checking the tires or filling up the gas tank before a long drive just looks like a mundane, maybe even annoying chore. But reframed through the lens of covert love, it's a fierce protective spell. It's a man metabolizing his fear of you being stranded on a dark road and using a full tank of gas as his literal shield. As we move into the teenage years, we really have to ask ourselves a critical question about the invisible weight he was carrying. What was the ghost at the kitchen table really carrying? Have you ever sat across the table from a father who was physically present, eating dinner, but seemingly 40 miles away in his own mind? It's so easy to interpret that ghost-like distance as a lack of interest in your life. But what was actually on his shoulders? Well, this concept of precarious manhood answers that question. It's defined as a masculine identity anchored in the provider role, where financial or professional setbacks feel like an existential threat. This shows us exactly why he wore the armor of the provider so tightly. His entire identity was anchored in keeping the family safe from ruin. So he was sitting at that table quietly metabolizing the terror of inflation, job insecurity, mortgage rates, holding it all internally so his family wouldn't have to feel the floors shaking beneath them. Looking at the contrast here, what we saw was him distracted, quiet, just saying we'll be fine. But what he felt was him running invisible calculations, absorbing family anxiety to return calm. It becomes devastatingly clear that the distance you felt wasn't him abandoning you. Instead of being distracted, he was running those invisible calculations. He was deliberately absorbing the family's anxiety just to maintain a calm facade. He was standing guard, making sure the architecture of your life didn't collapse, even if it cost him his emotional presence at dinner. Then we move into the inevitable conflict of adolescence. Quote, "The half-second pause was the moment between something you said and my response where I made a choice. Do I come at this as a wall or as a door?" We start to realize that every slammed door and arbitrary rule was far more complex than just simple rebellion. In that half-second pause during a screaming match, he was wrestling with a terrifying grief, the realization that you were growing up, becoming independent, and that he was slowly losing his role as your sole protector to the future. This reframing right here might change how you view your teenage arguments forever. What we saw was because I said so. But what he felt was, the world is not safe, and I cannot imagine it hurting you. His rigid authority, that classic "because I said so," wasn't actually about a desire for tyrannical control. It was the desperate grip of a man who knows the world has sharp edges, who loves you overwhelmingly, and simply doesn't have the tools to articulate that fear. And when family crisis hits, a medical emergency, a sudden loss, a financial collapse, the stoic ideal takes over completely. The father becomes the unshaken pillar holding the walls up from the outside. He handles the logistics, talks to the doctors, manages the endless paperwork, and ensures that the family has a stable point to rally around. He's quite literally holding the walls up from the outside so everyone inside can safely grieve. The reality of this contrast is an absolute gut punch. What we saw was unflappable calm and practical logistics. What he felt was him crying in the car and breaking down in the bathroom mirror. It reveals the extreme emotional quarantine he endured during those crises. The unflappable calm you saw was a deliberate, protective lie told out of stubborn love. What you didn't see was him breaking down in the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on his face, and telling himself to hold it together because you needed him to be unbreakable. Eventually, we reach the bittersweet horizon of the empty nest. Quote, "The architect finishes the house stands. The architect is no longer needed." What does the architect do then with all the tools? This is a profound identity crisis. For a father who has spent decades learning how to be essential, how to fix, provide, and protect, the realization that his child can catch themselves when they fall is staggering. What does the architect do when the house is finished? It's a massive, difficult transition from active builder to a quiet witness of the life he helped create. So, the cipher, closing the translation gap. Now that we've mapped out his inner country across the decades, it's time to shift gears from historical reflection into practical, actionable application. Because, honestly, understanding is only half the battle, right? The other half is closing that translation gap and actively healing your own family dynamic while you still have the time to do it. This brings us to the 20 questions for Dad. The Source ebook provides these specific, meticulously crafted prompts to help you bypass those safe, surface-level conversations about the weather, sports, and traffic. It breaks down into 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is the boy. Who was he before the armor? Pillar 2 is the shield, the hidden cost of his active fatherhood. And Pillar 3 is the legacy, what he wants to leave behind. By moving through these, you gently invite him to share his unedited history in a way that feels safe and structured. Next, we have the audio time capsule protocol. This brilliantly guides you through the process of preserving his irreplaceable acoustic signature, his voice, before it's too late. Step 1. Frame it as a family archival gift. Step 2. Place a phone face down to record. Step 3. Start with easy, concrete questions. And Step 4. Simply ask, "Tell me more about that." The brilliance here is the low-pressure setup. Placing the phone face down, framing it as an archive, and just asking, "Tell me more about that," turns what could be an awkward interview into a really profound act of preservation. We start to wrap up the structural review with the sanctuary letter. Quote, "Dad, the architecture of your life has held. You don't have to carry the perimeter anymore. The house is still standing." This is a beautiful pre-written tool from the source material. It's designed for you to read or even simply hand to him. It's a way to finally explicitly acknowledge the blueprints of his covert love, giving him permission to set down that heavy armor he's been wearing your entire life. Ultimately, this journey leaves you with a profound invitation to step across the translation gap. It offers you the tools to finally see the full, complex human being standing in the architecture of your life. So I leave you with this final thought to reflect on. If you could read the blueprints of your life, what would you say to the architect? Now that you can see the invisible labor, the quiet fears, and the ironclad devotion, what will you say to him? Welcome.
You know that distinct sound, the subtle click of the front door deadbolt being checked at 3 a.m.? Well, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to step into a really quiet, profound space to decode what that sound actually means. Today, we're diving into a powerful reflection journal called The Architect of the House. Now, this isn't just a book you sit back and read. It's actually a cipher. It's designed to help us understand a language that so many of us grew up around, but let's be honest, probably never fully learned to translate. We're going to explore this concept of covert love, and specifically, how to decode a father's completely silent dialect of iron and devotion. So let's kick things off with a foundational question that this workbook asks right from the jump. How do you measure love? Seriously, think about it. Have you been taught to measure love solely by how visible it is? I mean, growing up, society totally conditions us to look for very specific, obvious markers, right? We're looking for spoken affirmations, we expect these grand emotional gestures, and we really long for that verbal poetry. But what happens when the architect of your childhood home just didn't speak that language? What happens when love looks completely different? You see, we constantly crave that visible love, the words, the obvious warmth. But for a lot of us, our childhood homes were actually built by men who spoke a silent dialect of structural love. In this specific language, provision was literally their form of protection, and maintenance, that was their masterpiece. Checking those locks at 3 a.m., tightening the plumbing, or making absolutely sure the car's engine had fresh oil, that wasn't just a chore to cross off a list. It was a profound, quiet dedication. It's entirely a language of action, not words.
Section 1. The Foundation, Origins, and Inherited Principles.
Every structure starts way below the surface, right? Down in the strata of dirt and soil that literally no one ever sees. The foundation your father poured doesn't announce itself, and it for sure doesn't demand a round of applause. It simply holds the immense weight of absolutely everything built above it, season after season. And this foundation we're talking about isn't made of concrete. It's made of the unspoken rules, the inherited beliefs, and those specific heavy silences that formed the bedrock of your childhood home way before you ever had the words to describe them.
Now, as I mentioned, this explainer isn't just a passive summary, it's a highly practical cipher. We start with a tool called the Foundation Matrix. This is an exercise that helps you actively map out those bedrock beliefs across major life domains, things like money, emotional expression, and work. You essentially record his implicit belief, track how it actually showed up in daily life, and then you have to make a conscious choice. Is this belief a load-bearing pillar that still serves you today, or is it a crack in the foundation that desperately needs repouring? Do you keep it, or do you remodel it?
Section 2. The Load-Bearing Walls. Translating friction into compassion.
Okay, this is honestly one of the most transformative ideas in the entire text. In any house, the load-bearing walls carry the heaviest weight, and they absolutely resist remodeling. In a relationship, these are your points of greatest tension. But here's the perspective shift. Friction doesn't mean the house is broken. Those chronic, low-grade family tensions, the rigid expectations that press down on you like a heavy roof, or those silences that just lasted a bit too long, they simply mean the structure was bearing real heavy weight. And both of you were feeling that immense pressure.
So to move from that lingering resentment to actual maturity, the workbook introduces a tool called symmetric mapping. It's basically a side-by-side reconstruction that asks you to hold two truths at the exact same time. You take a specific moment of tension, and you map out what you carried and needed right next to what he likely carried and needed. It's absolutely not about invalidating your own experience. Rather, it's about finally recognizing the dual structural load both of you were bearing. And honestly, it's a massive step toward finding genuine compassion.
Section 3. The Cipher in Action. Translating the Friction.
You know, when we're young, we so often misinterpret silence as an absence of love. But as we grow up and start carrying our own heavy loads, we suddenly realize the house never actually fell down. Why? Because someone was actively absorbing all of the hidden anxieties of survival, working those grueling hours, quietly fixing things around the house. These actions were intentionally designed so that your childhood could just feel like peace. It was this fierce, quiet dedication spoken in a language we are only just now learning how to decode.
To really decode this, we use what's called the inventory of devotion. It's an incredibly practical tool to translate those dry, practical logistics into actual spoken vows. You list an action he took, identify the raw emotion beneath it, and then write out the translation, the vow of love he might have declared if he simply had the emotional vocabulary to do so. Doing this completely shifts our perspective from feeling unseen as a kid to realizing we were deeply structurally protected.
Section 4. Designing Your Legacy, Active Self-Authorship.
Now, decoding your father's past is profound, no doubt about it. But it's really only half the journey. The ultimate goal here is active self-authorship. You see, you inherited this house, sure, but you are now its sole architect. This legacy-building process requires you to walk very deliberately through every single room of your life. Step 1 is evaluating those inherited beliefs. Step 2 is deciding exactly what survives the translation into the next generation, what you keep and what you remodel. And step 3, that's commissioning the new build, creating something that is entirely yours.
To make this super concrete, the workbook breaks your legacy into 3 specific architectural zones. Zone A is the bedrock. This is the stuff you choose to pass on totally unchanged because it's genuinely valuable. Zone B is what you lovingly remodel. You take a good principle, but you upgrade the approach, maybe adding in that emotional vocabulary that was missing for you. And finally, Zone C is the new build. This is where you create entirely new ways of relating that literally didn't exist before you. Doing this ensures you are consciously shaping the emotional weather for everyone who comes after you.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the ultimate architect's declaration. You did not choose the house you were born into, but every single day, you choose the house you are building brick by brick, decision by decision, presence by presence. The structural integrity your father poured into your character, that remains intact, but the future design is completely 100% in your hands. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Armed with this new cipher, what kind of house will you choose to build tomorrow?
You know that